So we found that mining Bitcoin, it takes a lot of energy. These systems are constantly on. They anticipate that machine learning and AI will consume up to 60% of infrastructure energy by like 2035. So when you start thinking about that, right, you got to power the machine. You have to put business rules, processes, and principles and guardrails in place, right? And then you can do things like visual optimization. You can do things like learning and optics, and interoperability and care, natural language processing, talk to text. All of those are tools that are going to create outcomes. And basically anything you can learn and learn faster and apply business rules and governance to, whether it's, comorbidity indexes in patient care to resiliency and supply chain networks for components, all those things are on the table.
Without supplies, there's no surgery. Without products, there's no patient care. Welcome to Power Supply, the healthcare supply chain podcast focused on helping you navigate the intricacies of logistics, purchasing, contracting, and supplier relationships. Each episode, we speak with healthcare executives, supply chain leaders, and innovative entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the loading dock to strategic sourcing, from buyers to the C-suite, and across the enterprise, we tackle the real-life issues impacting the healthcare supply chain. Whether you're tuning in for conversation or inspiration, we're glad you're here. You're just in time to hear it from the source and stock up on insight. So sit back and plug into Power Supply.
This week on Power Supply, we speak with Vin Matozzo, CEO and managing partner at Paradigm Venture Group LLC. And today we're going to be talking about the interoperability in supply chain, and really by connecting the dots with all the different data sets that are there. And Vin is really going to paint a picture for us about what the future can look like and maybe should look like as we head into the next 10 years in the supply chain industry.
Yeah, Justin, Vin has put together quite a podcast for us to listen to today. I love his analogies. I think you'll be impressed at how he reaches out to the listener on these podcasts. I do believe there'll be times in the podcast where you'll rewind and go, what did he say right there? That was a really, really good point from probably a really good question. So I just want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to listen to this as he talks about data sets and really takes us down a road that we need to be aware of and is ever evolving and changing.
All right, we're going to be right back with Vin Matozzo, CEO and managing partner with Paradigm Venture Group LLC.
I'm Hayes Walder.
This is Gary Skinner.
And I'm Justin Poulin.
A production of 17 Studios. You're listening to Power Supply.
Joining us now is Vin Matozzo, CEO and managing partner at Paradigm Venture Group. And Vin, you and I have known each other for a while. I'm so excited to have you on the show. We're going to be talking about interoperability in supply chain through data visualization. And I know you're a data geek, right? I mean, I just know it. I'm so excited to dive into it and get your thoughts today. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, hey, appreciate that. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Huge fan. Absolutely. I'm a rehab data nerd, blade server in the basement, you name it, I'm there. So pleasure to be here. Very excited.
All right, so why don't you just tell the audience a little bit about yourself, where you come from, and I know your background isn't just in healthcare, right? So why don't you talk about that diverse experience of yours, kind of warm everybody up so we could talk about why you love data.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think, I've made a career out of taking on a lot of supply chain perils that most people wouldn't, right? So, spent some time at the big three GPOs, some pretty innovative academic medical centers in the Northeast, and previously prime subcontractor for Department of Defense. One way or another, all supplier quality, value analysis, predominantly around strategic sourcing. And it really became a passion for me. And there are really three separate pillars and verticals to where, you can't have value without any of the others. You wouldn't be able to do much in supply chain without the products, supplies, or services. And then the reality is I'm a huge master black belt lean continuous improvement guy. So I geek out on the lean, the process management, the opportunities. And I've always been really, really techie. So the fun part was really about 5-6 years ago when data and programs and platforms and apps started to come out. Because for me, it was a match made in heaven. You're able to take all these disparate data sets, opportunity, things that didn't necessarily correlate. And then just for fun, I went to school for a forensic science degree. And that really helped me unpack and look at, things differently to say, these things aren't necessarily different. You're just not casting a wide enough net. And when that started to happen and you can put things in and gamify and artificial intelligence and deep learning, even just rendering visualizations in Tableau, the visibility became a totally different game changer. I constantly brought that into my career, into my personal life, and whether, I'm tracking biometrics that I'm trying to hack my metabolism or fix a supplier resiliency score, it just kind of that way.
Strong. That's all I can say. Vin, I got a question though. It has nothing to do with supply chain.
Yes,
I'm going to
sir.
give you an all expense paid trip to see one concert anywhere. What concert are you choosing right now?
Oh, if I had to go back and I had to figure that out, it probably would have been Metallica in the SMA days where they did the
Dude, speaking my language, Enter Sandman. I love it, Vin.
It took symphony and harmonics, with the audio quality and that rebellious headbanger, mom can't make me mentality. And you ended up with a rogue catalyst in the middle. It was great.
There you go. That's all I needed right there. I'm done. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's a good one, Vin. I'm taking my daughter to her first concert. It's not quite Metallica, but Sunday we're going to see Weezer and Green Day. I thought that was for my daughter's first concert. I feel pretty proud of her.
I heard they wrote a song instead of if you pull this string, watch my sweater. If you pull this string, watch my mask fall away.
Please don't destroy my sweater.
Yeah, no, and Vin, just a pleasure to hear your background. I was taking a few notes as you're going through this as we dive into the podcast. And, you talked about value. I really like that you brought that up right out of the gate. I think a lot of us get overwhelmed with the data and, which direction do you take it in a strategic sourcing opportunity? So just building into that value, kind of start us off on phase one. How do we dive into the data to make sure it's efficient, effective, and it's got a purpose? We look at the key stakeholders. Are we looking where we're at? We look at the history. Maybe kind of walk us in how you start your process and how your mind gets set on grabbing the right data.
Yeah, so what being at the wrong place at the wrong time and being beat up by the best of them really meant to me is that it really depends on your maturity, right? And by that, I mean, do you know what you're looking at? Do you know what you don't know? And do you understand the quality and the architecture in picking out your information? Because again, you could have some very robust tools and some very great technology. It just really amplifies the problem. So are you looking at holistically cleansing your data set? So, there's a lot out there for GPOs, for technologies, for third-party firms. A lot of really what I've made a career out of is, being in the room with the best of them, right? Asking smart questions, the guys that are sitting out there, have the interoperability figured out, but then testing that. Taking that data set and saying, all right, I'm going to run it through a competitive database. I'm going to challenge myself to look at an opportunity through a different lens. And, you do that in a lot of different things in your life, right? But you don't necessarily do it with a data set. It showed up on a screen, so it must be right. It must be high quality, right? And we couldn't have got it wrong our entire career, could we? Right? So even if the data set changed or you had characteristics and attributes and, without getting into like all the crazy analogies of unspec and product spend codes and categorization, I think the fun part is knowing what you don't know, comparing yourself to the best, and then having an opportunity to really challenge a lot of those assumptions with new tech or with new procedures that are coming out. And that really fuels a lot of the lean and high reliability practices in data. And now you're trying to connect a lot of those points and those intersections of quality and care, but making sure that your assumptions are sound, that your data set constantly is growing, and that the variables that you plugged in make sense for the equation that you're trying to solve. Might not always be the case.
All right, Vin, that's great. So why don't we just set the table for the discussion, and why don't you tell us, how do you see the current state of interoperability?
Sure. So I think, really today, there's so many disparate, fragmented pieces particularly in a healthcare environment, right? So you have your ERP, your material systems, you have payer relations, payer mix, charge master capture, you have your EMR, your electronic medical records, your Epic, your Cerners, right? Everyone's got their own data sets, their own inefficiencies, their own flaws, maintenance, rules, calibrations that may or may not happen. And then there's this big thing like merger and acquisition, right? So you've assumed all the sins of your prior host and you've probably built some new ones along the way. Taking all that information, to really navigate across the continuum is extremely tough because one cleansing solution doesn't fit them all, right? And you can think about that. I'll bring it back to your cleaning analogy. What would happen if you just cleaned everything with bleach, right? Probably wouldn't work out too well and you wouldn't be able to use half the tools and places that you'd want to. So I think, when we really start to take apart data and integrity and interoperability, it wasn't meant to work together, right? Metric versus standard. You can do the same thing. You might even apply the same amount of torque, but the tool just won't fit. So in constructing a lot of those, it's really appropriate that you're intentional in selecting your partners, understanding their ability to scale and understanding how they've constructed their visualization and what they want to do with the outcomes of that. And it might not have been the same or what you set out to do 9 times out of 10. You learn along the way.
Vin, you brought up a really good point, talked about the metric versus the standard. You go into a little bit more detail of that. I think if we're in a room and we have the key players in a healthcare system or at a critical access hospital, what does that mean to those key stakeholders when you talk about the data, the metric versus the standard? Will you speak a little bit more on that, a little more deep in the weeds?
Absolutely. So I think what ends up happening is there's very different sales and very different opportunities, right? Even look at the quagmire of where you're placing supply chain these days. For a long time, it was purchasing, so it was finance, it went to the CFO. For a little bit, they started looking at the interoperability of a network, right? It's a supply network. It's not a chain. You are as strong as your weakest link, but now maybe we report to the chief operating officer, right? Because there's logistics, there's delivery, there's put away, there's inventory turns, right? Wow, that's complicated. Now we look at the paradigm of an integrated clinical supply chain, and organizations are reporting to the chief medical officer. So it's taking the outcomes, the sum of all the parts, what you do with the product, how that product is delivered, margin, revenue, efficiency, right place, right time, right cost. And then, oh, by the way, it can't do any harm. And you're measured on your outcome and the quality of that care, right? So even just where you've parked the organization has evolved and changed, with trends, whether it's political, whether it's reimbursement and government. But the reality is now it's a totally different game where that interoperability, your EMR, has to talk to your electronic interface systems, whether that's, inventory management to requisition and purchasing. And the cool part is as much as it used to be smoke and mirrors, now it's glitches and green screens, right? So there's a whole different breed of soldier that's required to be out there to really navigate that perspective because there are no carbon copy paper clips, that are sitting out there following purchase orders. Even look at what your iPhone does, right? Your phone made phone calls 10 years ago. Your purchasing department bought things. Today, there's interoperability and the triple aim in healthcare, where before you were just, did you buy it? How expensive was it? And was it cheaper than last year, right?
Hey, Vin, I have a quick question. And as it relates to all this data, the analysis, because we have a lot of folks out there listening to this that are supply chain executives, what role is machine learning and AI going to play in all this?
That's a great question. And there's many people that actually come to contact us about that quite a few different times. What really ends up happening is machine learning is really deep learning, right? There's a couple different phases of artificial intelligence that most people don't understand. It's like black box science, right? Roll up to the microwave, press a button, and I pray to God it comes out warm. But I think, when you look at artificial intelligence, I break it down into a couple components. One, it's machine learning and deep learning. Two, it's the Internet of Things, right? The connectivity from your smartwatch, right, to your PAC system, to potentially the wand that looks at, parts and components over a kit, to utilization and outcomes and visualization. Then as you look at deep learning and you look at how to apply machine learning, it really is quality control over an algorithm. Look at the evolution of your calculator, right? From zeros, pluses to TI-83 with cosine and tan. You have to build in rules. You have to build in structure. You have to amplify those. And then you're a slave to your computing and energy, right? So what most people also don't understand is that complexity that quality, the ethics that are involved in making those material decisions when you plug that into something that touches a person, and then the algorithms, right? So we found that mining Bitcoin, it takes a lot of energy. These systems are constantly on. They anticipate that machine learning and AI will consume up to 60% of infrastructure energy by like 2035. So when you start thinking about that, right, you got to power the machine. You have to put business rules, processes, and principles and guardrails in place, right? And then you can do things like visual optimization. You can do things like learning and optics, and interoperability and care, natural language processing, talk to text. All of those are tools that are going to create outcomes. And basically anything you can learn and learn faster and apply business rules and governance to, whether it's, comorbidity indexes in patient care to resiliency and supply chain networks for components, all those things are on the table. But now, again, it's a new class of soldier, a data scientist, rules and architecture that have to create that new weapon, right? Think about it. A diesel mechanic won't do too well on a Tesla.
Yeah. Elon Musk probably seconds that motion.
There you go.
So, Vin, I really want to talk about value analysis committees. And, we've had a prior conversation on this show with Bob Yokel, and we really talked about targeting those value analysis projects where the wins are, right? Like how many times do you get pulled down a rabbit hole for very minimal savings or minimal impact, for the organization. And I feel like it's the data that really can best guide that conversation, right? So how would you put that into context, the value for analysis as it relates to interoperability?
That's a great analogy. I'm going to go back to our metric and our standard, because a lot of times it's the approach, right? The cost to serve. Everyone hears is a juice worth the squeeze. Did we just convert 400 SKUs of an advanced wound care, Tegaderm dressing because we thought there were $30,000 in savings, but forgot that it cost the institution $45,000 to move, right? A lot of the challenges truly in lean, right? When you start applying these things to look at the tools, you're only as good as the data set. Because if the cost to serve, the cost to deliver the electricity, right? The fuel is more expensive than the output, you didn't incentivize that in the machine. And it's the same thing with margin versus revenue. I could save you tons of dollars at the pump in line item pricing, negotiating a contract. I've made a career out of that. But then when you look at the margin, the revenue, the reimbursement, I might have saved you $6 million in price, but I cost you $12 million in revenue because we didn't tie it to the appropriate payer or case mix that's out there. So again, you take the lean, pragmatic approaches, right? Do you have the right test for the model? Is it parametric? Is it parabolic, right? Did you associate the right set of parameters out the gate? And again, are you incentivized? Do you know what the cost to serve? Are you direct versus distributed? Is it bulk versus low unit of measure or just in time? All those factors are key attributes in your value equation, right? And if you calibrate those wrong, or you don't fully understand the cost to serve or your ability to navigate it, you're only as good as your ruler. My favorite analogy is you left your ruler in the sun and I put mine in the freezer, but they all measure 12 inches, right?
You know what? Really liked your analogy, the margin versus revenue dialogue discussion. I thought that was a really, really key point that's going to be one of our takeaways. Justin, you got thoughts on this too, or what are you thinking?
Well, I'm just wondering, what are the obstacles? I feel like a lot of places just have a hard time getting started with it. So, is there a reluctance? Are people just not confident maybe in some of the concepts or is it just, what are the obstacles? Why don't we move faster forward?
What's the separation? Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Take it into your personal life, right? So could you not put your kids on the bus because that's the day the mortgage is due? Right? It's really getting simple analogies down to those facts, right? That everything is interoperable. It's finding the right linchpin and data point. And, being fortunate enough to have a lean background and, it's a blessing and a curse. You apply that to, how you put your Cheerios in your bowl in the morning versus how you calculate your savings and your financial cost adjustments in your 9 to 5. The interesting part is navigating value, right? The outcomes and the inventory, as well as the strategic sourcing components, because not all agreements, not all suppliers, not all deals are made the same. And so I think where most organizations struggle, quite candidly, is figuring out how to actually write a playbook across the team. And this is where I get excited. It's the interoperability of workflows. To take a manufacturer back order report, an allocation, a disruption notification, even a discontinuation of product, and to associate through the sourcing people, through the data master, item master catalog, through the value analysis nurse that needs to say, is a trocar, a trocar, a trocar, or doesn't matter. And then actually understand the inputs from logistics, from a revenue, from a clinical perspective, all to the bottom line and what gets charged to the patient. So even just navigating that simple example right there of a disruption, and we all deal with that, right? There's been more disruptions in the past 10 years in healthcare than there's been probably than in our collective careers. I think so that the reality comes down to not getting analysis by paralysis, creating infrastructure to have high reliability practices in each one of your verticals, to know that when you're putting together this inch, that centimeter, that millimeter, you're calibrated and that it's all gravitating towards the same measurement, right? So having your sourcing team, having your procurement team have those key KPIs that drive those value outcomes, having your logistics team coordinated and having that interoperability to truly share what happens, how it touches the patient, how it's delivered, and what it costs. So the reality is there's a lot of smoke and mirrors out there, but it takes depth and adaptability of those systems, but it also takes a connected approach. And the last analogy I'll really leave you with is that like of a financial advisor, right? How many accountants or financial advisors actually talk to your healthcare providers? How many healthcare providers and talk to your insurance brokers? And how many of those, if we're fortunate enough or unfortunate enough to have a nutritionist, talk to them? Don't think there's not going to be a day where you go into Stop and Shop and you scan your savings card and it tells you that, well, welcome to your high cholesterol diet plan. And it's cheaper at the grocery store, but your insurance premiums just went up 5%, right? And I think when you look at the interoperability of data and how scary that is, with guys from like CVS and Procter and Gamble that have figured that out from the brand of deodorant you wear, and we also struggle to figure out how we're going to put supplies on shelves, just because the location or the geography or the technology is different. So the examples are there. The stories are compelling. The reality is it takes that new breed of soldier, that different mentality to look at how to connect the seemingly disparate data points.
You said something about high reliability. And I'm assuming that when you say that you really got to have somebody with that kind of vision and dig in, and then you said having the processes in place, is a lot of that about setting standards for data sets so that they can talk across systems? Is it that simple, or is it far more complex than that?
I think everything has a people, a process, a technology, and a relevancy. And I use relevancy because you're only as good as the data around you, and it's kind of like a dental analogy, right? If you're not whitening, you're yellowing. You're getting worse because the environment's getting more complicated every day. And by that, I mean, when you have a data plan, it's great for the next 3 years or the next 3 months. The reality is you're subject to what's going on around you. HRO, high reliability organizations, are looking at Swiss cheese. So that's the continuous improvement of what's going on to make sure that there aren't misses, process gaps, education, communication problems. So that's in a workflow and a stream lane by itself. A lot of that's associated with clinical only, but your procurement practices, your contracting practices, your legal practices, your IT practices should also have a high reliability, high producibility component. Then now you can create your accuracy and your quality, and that's where you can connect. Because if you don't do that, you've only just accelerated bad data.
Really good points on this, Vin. I want to go back to your discussion of the data and building out that strategic plan. The evolution of AI, learning, is it feasible to do a 3 to 5 year plan anymore on the data? Or is it morphing and changing every day? Every 6 months we're reviewing it, we're looking at it. What are you seeing in the market as it moves forward, Vin? And are we addressing those that maybe had a 5 year plan, had a strategic plan in place? Those are just out the window because the rate of data and how we're getting it and access to it moving forward. How's that changing? So if you could speak to that a little bit, Vin, I appreciate it.
Yeah, that's the challenge of a healthcare or really any professional in today's environment, right? Everyone's got a plan until something goes wrong. Insert pandemic, insert cybersecurity issues, right? So security design review, SOC 2 audits, even take a concept like program management. 10, 15 years ago, didn't really exist. So you're evolving based on the environment that you have to serve. And if you look at the quality metrics that are out there, your 3 to 5 year plan is probably in a 3-month state of revision, right? As far as you know to ask the right questions, the value equation we talked about changes.
Yep.
And the reality is you're only as good as your IT partners that can, collaborate with you. You have to turn around and figure out, what's going to be the next hot thing. And that's why I think there's a $1 trillion industry that's coming down the pike, with AI and machine learning. Because once you understand your business rules, you understand your cost to serve, you create high reliability practices. Now you can create an equation to manage the complexity, to learn, to put business rules, evolve and adapt. And that's, where quantum computing, where AI is going. It's taking certain data governances. And to break that down into a really easy analogy, think about it this way. The English alphabet is 26 letters, arguably, right? How some people, really scratch them out, or your penmanship. But the reality is, look at what you do with those 26 letters, right? Some people are very verbose and eloquent. Other people have a slang or a jargon, right? But it's the same rendering of those 26 letters. And what happens in prose and poetry and haiku or in anything like that are all business rules that really are set around the use of language. Now you can put in spell check, right? You augmented the technology with the program. And, I got a ton of red squiggly lines when I write a narrative, right? But the reality was those business rules are driving me to be more efficient, more effective. And then once you learn my slang, you learn my jargon. Now there's a Vin chatbot, right? That chatbot will take, my euphemisms, my analogies, my jargon, maybe even my slang or my accent, right? And we'll equate that into something that translates more meaningfully to your audience or your intended target. And that's where it gets really powerful. From the alphabet to the word processor, from the word processor to the chatbot, from the chatbot to artificial intelligence, making, programming, understanding, and creating deep learning models around what you want to achieve.
Wow. I was just going to ask you for your vision, and I think you beat me to the punch. Yep. And you really did explain it so well. Your analogies are killer. You're the analogy man, Vin. Seriously.
Breaking it down. Hayes had a good follow-up. Hayes is waiting for his question.
I got
He's
one.
ready.
Here's my question, Vin, though. Actually, all these things that you're talking about is, the kind of like the supply chain executive of the future. He has to know all this stuff. Where are they going to learn this stuff? Because this is not,
great point.
This is high level stuff, and it's not contracting, sourcing. It's a whole nother thing.
It is. And, it's important. And I think this is where, the leadership 2.0, emotional intelligence, talent management, having a curriculum, these organizations where you learn it are the professional and affinity groups, podcasts like this. Look at technology. Is it that we didn't know better or that we just know faster? And what really excites me, growing up, I was a buyer 10, 15, 20 years ago, right? I processed manual purchase orders before EDI. I saw EDI come into play, right? And so I've grown up in that industry where, I remember the carbon copy forms where I'd go home with blue hands at the end of the day, right?
Jeez.
To now being able to do demand forecasting on my iPhone and Smartsheet and Tableau, right? To look at that. And so exactly to your point, Hayes, there's a talent management vertical of institutions, of organizations, of podcasts, of crowdsourcing, crowdfunding. Some of it's going to be academic driven, right? Institutions, big 32 academic medical centers that are going to roll programs out, the MIT, the Yales of the world, right? But some of that's going to be inherent learning. And this is now where the baby boomer gets to meet the Gen Xer, that gets to meet the generation that we haven't even met yet. And the goal is to take all those attributes from all three of the generations, the work ethic, the motivation, the tenacity of the baby boomer, to the creativity, the flexibility, the adaptability of the workforce today, and model out a talent management plan that really transcends that gap, right? So you need to know the basics because, again, mechanics, physics, the laws, right, are going to stay the same. But, again, your iPhone, I use that analogy very often, right? Your telephone made a phone call 10 years ago. What could you do on your phone today? And it wasn't the same guy at Ma Bell that's making the circuit boards at Apple.
Vin, I love the point that you're making about the pace of play and the access to that information. So everything always had to be so formalized, and prior to having formalized education, you just had to have great mentorship. But now what I think I just heard you say is that really it's going to be the driven individuals who are active self-learners who really get excited about these kinds of concepts, that stay ahead of the curve, get other people excited. And it's almost like we want to create a fad to continue to escalate that pace of play and do better things in supply chain and in healthcare.
No, you're spot on. It's making learning cool again, right? And the reality is you can customize it, because now, if you're the kid that wants to put his podcast on with his AirPods, right, and listen to it, if you want to go attend a formal training seminar, you want to walk the halls with conferences, you can gain a mentor. You also can sign up for at your pace learning and training. But the reality is, and you nailed it, Justin, it's those individuals that are really going to take it upon themselves to look at how they stay relevant. And that's really what excites me as kind of that new class of soldier, and why I've really chosen to kind of break out and go on my own, right? There's benefits to conventional learning, and you want to learn history so that you're not doomed to repeat it. But it also doesn't mean that that's what the future has to be molded around. And it comes along every once in a while, right, where someone will break the mold or do something crazy. And I'm not talking about a mop to Swiffer, right? Or I'm not talking about, a pen to an automatic pencil. I'm talking about, static electric discharge as it relates to fuel and energy sources, right? Hydroelectricity that as a clean energy source that didn't exist. Travel to Mars isn't going to happen on fossil fuel. So when we really look at those opportunities and how we can extrapolate what the future looks like, I'm proud and I'm part to be that catalyst, right? That's going to challenge people to think outside the box, do more with less, right? That's everybody's tagline nowadays. But how could we be faster, more efficient, and create a more rewarding experience that allows people to engage passionately? And I've always done that, right? People look at me and they go, Vin, wow, you're pretty cool. You're innovative. You're a decent dude. What are you doing in supply chain, right? But I think that's the next frontier, right? It really is taking, that level of learning and applying my own twist and my own brand. And I think, there are many people like me out there nowadays, and that's what makes it exciting. And the faster we group, the faster we learn, the faster we educate each other, and steel sharpens steel. Everybody becomes a sharper marble.
Well, I'll tell you, Vin, a little bit of behind the scenes. As I prepare guests for these interviews, I always remind them to focus primarily on their passion. And just due to us getting a late start on the interview, I never even got to tell you to focus on your passion before we got started. We just hit record and jumped into it. And you are not lacking passion. And as you mentioned, it's really, our job as podcasts or people that do get excited about supply chain and strategic sourcing and value analysis to just continue to pay that forward. And you certainly did that for our audience today. So thanks so much for coming on.
No, I really appreciate the venue and the forum. And I think you guys got it. It's the ability to put things in people's ears and in people's faces in the way that they want to see them. And this is what's going to move, our ecosystem. This is what's going to move healthcare. This is what's going to move, I think the human race forward. So really excited. Great work with you guys. Love the podcast. Hayes, Gary, Aaron, Justin. It's great stuff. And, keep fighting the good fight, guys.
Thanks, Vin.
And hopefully we'll all be sharper marbles.
You like that, huh?
I love that.
Steel sharpening steel, baby.
That was Vin Matozzo, CEO and managing partner with Paradigm Venture Group LLC. And boy, I'll tell you what an eloquent conversation. Loved all of Vin's, analogies to really paint the picture. But boy, he's got an incredible vision and an incredible passion for the future of supply chain. And the vision that he's painting is really big picture. And I love what he had to say about self-learners and podcasts and education. That it's great to have that baseline, but you can't stop just because you got a degree. For us to really drive this industry forward, it's just going to take creative thinking, creative technology, and interoperability, tying everything together from one end to the other end of the spectrum so that things really start to fit together and work, and so that we can see them at a whole nother strategic level.
And I echo that point. I thought he did a really good job about showing what is important, but what I thought was really important and interesting was of the new skill set of supply chain moving forward. It's different than it is today. And so it was really, really good. And so I'm glad that he was here, and I hope you enjoyed.
All right, that's going to do it for this week's show. As a reminder, you can help support Power Supply by subscribing on Apple, Amazon, or Google Podcasts, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or your favorite podcast application. You can also access bonus content for certain episodes by downloading our smartphone app for iPhone and Android. We'd certainly appreciate a rating and a review because your feedback is important to the show. And on behalf of Gary Hayes and myself, thank you for listening to this week's episode of Power Supply.